When I think about Biomutant, the one thing that comes to mind over and over and over is, I wish this game had had one more year to work itself out. Announced on August 21st, 2017, and released on May 25th, 2021, the game spent a little over 4 years and 4 days in development and being made. In that time, some very neat ideas went into the game. Crafting system, the character creator, and the setting for the world itself. But some not-so-great ideas went into it as well. Or shall I say, some more half-baked ideas went into it. I love games like this, games that push some new idea or some new perspective in the industry. And with this game's environmentalist message combined with the anthropomorphic animal point of view, and a vaguely Asian meets Native American style spiritual philosophy, Biomutant was poised to deliver on that promise of being a unique gaming experience. So let's explore that promise, both the good and the bad, the flaws and the triumphs, the light and the dark. Please keep in mind this is my own interpretation and therefore should not be taken as fact, nor am I an authority on this subject. By no means am I a game maker, nor will I pretend to understand the stress and efforts that went into making this game. Throughout the video, I will be dropping my own personal thoughts and opinions on the concepts and ideas on display, as well as offering some ideas as to how to fix certain issues and how those issues could be remedied, as I believe criticism without feedback is pointless at best and worthless at most, so this video will not be strictly analytical in nature. So if you don't mind any of that, or my more relaxed and less polished style of game critiquing, settle in and let's discuss the game that is Biomutant. Upon loading up the game, you are greeted with a stylish cutscene of small anthropomorphic rodent standing over what appears to be a puddle of pollutants. When the creature reaches out to touch the pool, its hand begins to rapidly change and mutate, becoming oily and disfigured. This would be one of Biomutant's initial promises, and in my opinion, one of its biggest missed opportunities. The idea that evolution and mutation were ongoing forces in this world, and would help shape your character as you play. As the cutscene continues, a small rodent is attacked by what appears to be some kind of mutated bear. A battle ensues in which the rodent seems to have the upper hand until the bear creature pulls out what looks to be an underwater mine on a chain, thus introducing the second and third promises of this game. Firstly, that survival of the fittest is still very much a part of this world, and secondly, that some suspension of disbelief is going to need to exist for you to take the world seriously. The cutscene ends with our furry friend diving into a hole in the wall and escaping to fight another day. This part represents something not so much as a promise, but as more of a world-building lore, that the map we will be playing is in an isolated valley and that the abundance of life we find there is not common in the rest of the world. Upon actually starting the game proper, we are greeted with the character creation screen. The industry standard in most games is to select your appearance, then your stats and skills, with your appearance rarely affecting said stats or skills. In Biomutant, however, the appearance of the player and their starting stats are linked in a fundamental way. There are 6 species to choose from in the beginning: Murgle, Primal, Hyla, Dumdon, Thip, and Rex, each one with their own unique starting stats and appearance. When I first played the game, I spent a few minutes trying to puzzle out what real-world species each in-game species represented. Thip definitely seemed to be some kind of fox to me, backed up by their intelligence and agility. Murgle appeared to be some kind of bat. Primal and Rex looked to be some kind of rodent, perhaps a squirrel or mouse, respectively. And Hyla seemed to be some kind of small canine. I never could figure out what the Dum-Dum was, though. Upon selecting your starting breed, you are allowed to change your starting stats to better fit your playstyle. And it's here that one of Biomutant's most notable and interesting features comes into play. Changing your stats also changes your appearance, sometimes drastically. Want a stronger character that can swing a club and hit like a truck? Your character's arms will get bigger, their shoulders will broaden, and their chest will expand. Want a fast and nimble character that can dodge and weave through attacks? Your arms and legs will lengthen, your body mass will shrink, and you will become thinner and faster. Want a smooth, talking, persuasive character? Your facial features will become more pronounced and less animalistic. At its core, this is a wonderful and interesting idea, and was touted as one of Biomutant's main selling features, that your stats would affect your appearance as you play. But this also brings to the forefront the flaw with this idea, mainly that it is very hard to make a decent-looking character if your intended playstyle does not match your desired appearance. For example, I like to play intelligent, mage-like characters in most RPGs. Well, Biomutant decrees that from a stats and appearance perspective, my character should be short with an abnormally large head, like disproportionately large when compared to my body, which is not how I want my character to look. But if I put points into agility to make him taller, it detracts from his intelligence and instead buffs his movement speed. On a side note, I can't understand why out of all of these stats, agility governs a basically useless score, such as movement speed. Especially when all characters I've made, regardless of their score, all seem to move at the same speed more or less. Why not instead have agility affect jump height? Or perhaps the player's skill with guns, if not their damage, then perhaps reload speed. Or your agility could be used to make more precise and accurate shots. One trick I did discover rather quickly was to select the random button on my appearance and then go through the creator to set up the fur patterns and colors I wanted, as well as my class, but then on the final page to backtrack back to the beginning of the character creation process. Doing so would treat my initially selected appearance as the starting appearance and would allow me to make more tweaks and adjustment to the character in hopes of making a more acceptable looking character. In the end, I would usually settle on a creature like the one you see before you, which I lovingly refer to as my murder Umbreon. Fur patterning and colors are about what you'd expect, so they're not worth going too in-depth about them. There's a decent selection, and the use of a color wheel and intensity slider gives you nearly infinite choices, all of which are more than welcome. Although, it can at times be a bit hard to find the correct fur pattern that you want, given that they went with a field selector tool rather than a sliding bar tool. Overall, I'm not 100% sure how to improve this system without compromising the promise that your stats will affect your appearance. Perhaps one way it could be done would be by allowing the user to set certain characteristics like height or weight independent using their own sliders. Classes are your usual collection of RPG trifecta and in-betweeners, of which I have a few opinions. Deadeye, the class I usually end up playing, starts off with a buster sword and a revolver, and comes off feeling as a kind of combination gunslinger and anime samurai. Their class special is to reload their ranged weapon when they only have a few rounds left to get an immediate reload and an additional 20% damage to each shot. And this special is a bit of a game changer, and certainly came in handy on more than one occasion, especially if you give into the spray and pray mentality that the game wants you to use. According to the lore, a Deadeye is a skilled rogue who's chosen a life outside of the law and of society's values. Commando, the class for people who like shooty bang bang. In the lore, a commando is a trained operative of an elite special operations force, and are used to working in smaller teams. Their passive 10% bonus to gun damage is nice if you're playing a predominantly ranged character, but has its own flaws given how the mechanic of ranged combat works, of which we'll get into later. Psy-Freak, the class I'd normally want to play, the mage of the game, who supposedly specializes in spamming psi or mutation attacks. In the lore of the game, they're outsiders who live outside normal society, so they can experiment and dabble with their burgeoning psionic abilities and mutations. In reality, I don't find playing as them making use of your psi or mutation attacks any more powerful or useful. In fact, Psy-Freaks feel almost no different from the other classes, with the small exception that their starting weapon is a pair of electrically charged gauntlets that cannot be enhanced or crafted in any way, giving them a severe disadvantage if you're trying to play the class from an in-lore perspective. In fact, one of the only redeeming qualities about this class is a perk you can take that will increase how fast your mana or psi energy regenerates, allowing you to dodge more often or to toss out an additional psi or mutation attack. We'll discuss the psi and mutation abilities later on in this video. Saboteur, the rogue of the game. All about speed and agility. Get in, stab or shoot something a few times, then effortlessly dodge or roll away as they try to attack. In lore, the Saboteur is a cunning, skilled explorer trained to operate covertly in both suburbs and wilderness. Unlike the other starting classes, with the exception of a DLC class that we'll talk about in a second, Saboteurs start with the ability to use 2 single-handed melee weapons at once, with an additional passive that decreases their cost for dodging by 20% overall. I don't have much to say about this class. I don't usually play these kinds of characters, so I don't have a big opinion on them. The animation that plays for the class is pretty cool, though. Sentinel, the fighter. In lore, Sentinels dedicate themselves to protecting a house or village. Is for the organization as a whole, including their supreme beliefs in the organization's dogma. Their passive grants them a bonus 10 to their armor. Not 10%, just a flat 10 to your overall armor score. It's an okay class, though in my opinion, it's overshadowed by the DLC class. It can be useful for when you're playing a melee-focused fighter, but I feel like its passive ability is just a waste, and doesn't end up helping that much. Mercenary. Do you have $2.99? Then let me tell you about the Mercenary class. Offered as a pre-order bonus and later as a DLC, the Mercenary class is one of the better classes to play as, in my opinion. In lore, the Mercenary is a trained swordsman who has mastered the art of the blade, with their passives allowing them to wield 2 single-handed melee weapons at once, like the Saboteur, while giving them an additional 10% bonus damage to those weapons. Overall, the classes of Biomutant feel bland and generic, despite the lore the game tries to add in about them. None of them ever interact with the world any differently than the others. I've never had another sci-freak comment on my abilities, or met another Deadeye out in the world on a hunt, or had anyone show me an ounce of respect for playing a Sentinel, Commando, or Mercenary. And this is my first instance of, I wish this game had had another year. I wish it had had another year so it could look at these classes and realize how painfully samey they all are. In the late game, nearly all of the classes feel exactly the same, with the only minor caveat being if they can use dual weapons or not. So how would I go about fixing this system? For one, I'd make it so the classes have their own stat bonuses and deficits, independent from the character creators, so they don't affect how you look. Additionally, I'd change the passives from all of the classes, giving each 2 passive abilities, and perhaps upping their values to make them more substantial. In a perfect world, I'd also rework the game opening to tailor them to better utilize the player's selected classes, perhaps starting them out at different locations on the map depending on what class they chose. Additionally, I'd write in both ambient and active dialogue to reference your character's class choice, perhaps having people in the village react with uncertainty and fear of a sci-freak, whereas they might treat a Commando or Sentinel with respect and honor. The issue with the classes is that they just don't feel distinct, and after 20 hours of gameplay, that's a problem, but not the end of the world. Once out of the character creator, players are led to a scripted fork in the path and introduced to the 2 side companion characters, Light and Dark. These characters will pipe up any time there is a moral component to a decision, and are clearly meant to reference the idea of an angel and devil sitting on the player's shoulders and influencing their decisions. That being said, their dialogue is mostly self-serving and doesn't actually challenge the user in any way. They don't make the decisions more nuanced or more difficult by pointing out unforeseen consequences or outcomes, a la Kreia from KOTOR. They don't bring added context or definition to your character's actions or motivations, as in Mass Effect's moral system. Overall, morality in this game is almost worthless. You can be true dark but still elect to work with a tribe that is described as light-coded, and vice versa. No one will comment on your moral leanings, and the idea that psi powers should be hidden away behind arbitrary ranks as if they are spiritual rewards rather than psionic powers and mutations as they are described is nonsensical. In my opinion, it feels like these 2 were added because psi powers are gated behind light and dark ranks. So when these 2 pop up, you know the decision you're about to make will count towards if you get that shiny new power you've been eyeing or not. Morality does seem to play a small part when it comes to NPC characters you'll meet in the world, as some of them refuse to join you in the endgame because of your alignment. However, I find this odd since I had both light and dark scores in the mid-20s nearing the end of the game, and characters still refused to join me. How would I change this system? For one, I might seriously consider removing it. I find the characters of light and dark to be more annoying than not. They have a few jokes I chuckled at, but for the most part, I skipped most of their dialogue and shenanigans because I just didn't care. If I had to keep the mechanic, I'd rework it into a more traditional morality system, with the added twist that if you're working with a tribe of the opposite values, they may attempt to betray you at the end of their quest line, seeing you instead as a threat to their way of life. As it is, the important decision you're being asked to make right now, choose the left path or the right one. A truly critical decision that, upon making, we're free to completely ignore and go down the opposite path if we so choose. Upon reaching a clearing, we find a dead animal, and the narrator gives us our first hint of our character's background. We used to call this place home, but something happened and caused us to turn our backs and run away from it. Where did we go? What did we do? How long have we been gone? All questions for another time, as the same bear monster from the cutscene attacks us. In fact, this entire sequence where we learn the basics of combat is just an in-game recreation of that previous cutscene. Let's talk about combat. It's serviceable, at best. Not good, but not great, although your choice of weapon will make a big difference. Melee combat in general feels okay, though there doesn't seem to be quite enough feedback if your attacks land or not. Enemies will often power through your attacks as if you had just been standing there. And even when using heavy weapons that supposedly have a higher chance to stagger, I never felt like the frequency was quite right. On larger enemies, this can be forgiven, I suppose. But on the normal-sized enemies, it can feel a bit odd. I'm hitting a man who is the same size as me with what is basically a cobbled-together sledgehammer. Why is he not staggering? It also doesn't help that no matter what kind of weapon you choose to use, and there is a modest selection of types to try, they all only have 5 or so combos to choose from. This leads to combat encounters feeling samey, if not identical to each other, as you use the same combos over and over and over and over, until something comes along that forces you out of this rut. For most of my playthroughs, I use the two-handed crushing style weapon, only changing it up at the very end of my playthrough when I found a two-handed slashing weapon that I liked visually more. Guns, in my opinion, are the worst. Aiming is done using a combination of the camera and an auto-target lock-on system to lock on to whichever enemy is nearest to you. There's no iron sight or manual aiming of any kind, not even for guns with scopes or sights attached to them. It's impossible to feel like a sharpshooter or a gunslinger because the entire system lacks finesse and precision. The player can angle the camera, sure, but the moment the enemy shifts, the part of them that's being targeted will change. Shooting items out of the air is even harder, with lobbed barrels being a particular danger that I just had to learn to dodge rather than shoot. I'll discuss the character's Wung Fu ability later in the video, as I consider them to be more powers than combos. Improving the combat system wouldn't be that hard, but adding depth to the system would be. Some people think that Dark Souls-style combat is the apex of hack-and-slash combat. Others prefer a more gentle approach, via Legend of Zelda or Skyrim. Personally, I think the issue goes deeper than that. Combat encounters feel very much the same after a while, with only large or special enemies shaking up those encounters. There definitely needs to be more than 5 main combos to choose from, one of which I almost never used. Perhaps if you could change the weapons mid-combo, or had different combos that were a combination of light and heavy attacks for each weapon type. I think a combat style similar to the newer Legend of Zelda games would have been an overall better decision for this type of game. Specifically when it comes to ranged attacks, the lack of any real skill-based aiming is a major problem. Perhaps iron sights could only be unlocked if the gun you're using has a scope or a sight attached to it. Or perhaps this was locked behind a skill rank of some kind. Or perhaps iron sight aiming speed could be tied to the agility of a character. In the end, something needs to be done about combat, and specifically the ranged combat. Not that any of that will matter for this fight, as after we shatter our attacker's main weapon, we see him unsling the familiar underwater mine on a chain and start to approach us, with the tutorial telling us that it's time to run. So we do, slipping through a hole in the concrete wall behind us before finding ourselves in a pre-world facility, or bang shelter as the game likes to call them. Making our way through the facility, we fight some irradiated wildlife and are introduced to puzzles and the idea of one-time use elemental attachment to our guns, which is so self-explanatory it deserves no actual explanation. Puzzles in this game are not complicated, which I think is probably a good thing, with them falling into one of 3 categories. Light up the colored notches, flip all the lights till they're all powered on, and match the correct number of letters in the sequence. There are a few other types of puzzles, but for the most part, those will be the main 3 that you'll be interacting with for the next 20 hours or so. While I find the idea of pre-world appliances and certain items being treated as a puzzle to the inhabitants of this world a fun idea, I think the sheer number of them is a major pain in the ass, especially when the map markers litter the game world when I look at its overworld map. And some of the items, I just don't see the need for them to be made into puzzles. Things like toilets, washing machines, telephone booths, and safes can provide decent loot, so logically they make sense to be puzzles. But other items, such as radios, TVs, pianos, and guitars, don't, as they can't actually contain anything for the user to find. On top of this, the game insists that each puzzle item have anywhere from 3 to 5 sibling pieces in the world, and then asks you to find all of them in what is essentially busy. My thoughts on puzzles in this game is brief. I think the letter sequence puzzle should be removed entirely, as it only shows up once or twice and could easily be replaced with a colored notch or a directional light puzzle. Additionally, I think the number of puzzles should be reduced to 1 for items that cannot logically yield some kind of loot, perhaps by making the item itself the loot and therefore worth the effort of tracking down. Continuing through the pre-world facility, we soon encounter our first friendly character that apparently we know already, named Out of Date, who is in need of help as he is being attacked by a group of bandits. After saving him from the bandits, he leads us to his home and gives us a bit of background, that he knew us when we were a child and helped to teach us about the Tree of Life. And it's here that we get our first concrete taste of world-building lore. Specifically, that everything in this valley owes its life to a sacred tree called the Tree of Life. And that we, as a child, helped the tree to grow by feeding it something called a nono, or a potato person. The concept or idea of a tree of life is a fundamental archetype in many real-world mythologies, religions, and philosophical traditions. It fits in well with the game's environmentalist focus. However, our connection to this tree is vague at best, and we never again return to the location in the flashback. In the lore, it's implied that Out of Date, when he was younger, used to tend to and care for the tree while it was still growing, and perhaps we were meant to take over for him when he grew old. Personally, I like the idea of the Tree of Life. Visually, I love that it spirals like a DNA's double helix, and I find the idea that the entire valley owes its prosperity to this tree to be a relatable and engaging story hook. As commonplace as the idea is in fantasy media, for many decades and centuries in our real world, various spiritually minded cultures have looked to nature and seen the connection that various plants and animals have with each other, and strove to live harmoniously within that world without upsetting its balance. But the idea of a tree of life is usually more abstract and spiritual, a belief that we are all connected and what affects one will eventually affect the others in time. So to have that idea made manifest and corporeal in the game is a fun idea to me, while also serving as a functional purpose as well. To know for a fact that this tree is responsible for the life within the valley immediately allows the players to draw some conclusions about the world. 1. The rest of the world is probably not in as good shape as this valley, otherwise this tree of life would not be so special. 2. Those worshipping the tree who tend to it are probably aligned with the light. 3. Those that wish to harm the tree or kill it must be aligned with the dark. And 4. The tree is not self-sustaining, and if left alone, will die. And finally, after all that, we find ourselves emerging from the underground shelter into the bright, sun-filled valley that the game will take place in. We get a nice pan-out shot of the surrounding valley, and a voiceover telling us what this game will be about. Continuing on our way down the path, we encounter a small village just in time to watch as a World Eater, one of the 4 main story bosses of the game, destroys the village in a rampage. I'll be honest, I don't like this sequence. For one, as a light-sided character, my first instinct is to run over and try to help the villagers fight off this creature. Yet no option to do so is offered to me, and instead my character is scripted to just stand there and watch, control only being returned to me after the World Eater has seemingly tunneled through the side of a nearby cliff wall, without apparently leaving any sort of visual mark that it was there. Running over to the ruins of the destroyed village leads to the discovery of a sole survivor, and the introduction of a game mechanic. that people in the world will occasionally need rescuing or help, and how you respond will affect your moral standing. In a traditional morality system, good is seen as virtuous because it asks the person doing the good act to give something up or inconvenience themselves in some way for the sake of another. Saving a life, donating money, giving a friend a ride to work, saving someone from a burning building. At their core, each of these acts costs the person performing them something. That something could be as simple as their time, or as important as an internal organ, or even the possibility of losing their own life. And it is through that sacrifice, or the potential for sacrifice, that we draw the knowledge that their action is the right thing to do. At the same time, inaction, in my opinion, should not be seen as inherently evil, but instead as a shade of in-between gray. You choose not to act. Now, some could argue that by choosing not to act, a person has made a selfish choice, and therefore it should be seen as inherently evil. But it is also important to note that we ourselves are thinking, logical creatures. We act out of reason and logic only under the best of circumstances, and at the worst of times with blind fear and retaliatory actions, which is completely different from willingly adding to another's misery and harm. So I would argue that there is a moral gray area that does exist and should be accounted for, but unfortunately is just not taken into consideration with this game. Evil action is an action that knowingly and willfully harms another or adds to their misfortune. Killing someone, robbing a bank, lying to a friend so they suffer, setting someone's house on fire. These are all inherently evil acts. In a metaphysical sense, they do not cost the person performing them, and have the potential to actually help them gain something in the long run. Now, that is all, of course, a very simple summary of good and evil. By no means am I a scholar, and by no means am I someone who's studied these concepts in depth. So by all means, take those summaries with a grain of salt. All this being said, Biomutant doesn't really understand the concept of good and evil. So when I offer to help these people, nothing happens and nothing is taken from me, seeming as if all my character does is say a few words of encouragement, and that is enough to make up for everything that has happened. It's the equivalent of my character saying, "Hey Tom, sorry your home got destroyed, your family is all dead, and you're completely alone now, but you got this, bro." Conversely, being evil has no benefit, as I gain nothing from the act beyond a short animation of our character smacking the survivor in the face, which, if I'm honest, doesn't come off as evil, and instead comes off as a little more sadistic or even cruel. From a mechanical standpoint, these choices to help or to harm can be made with absolutely no consequence. Nothing meaningful will be lost or gained no matter what I pick. The only reward I am given is a point in either my light or dark ranking. And again, the light and dark characters will pop up to make extra sure I know which one I am choosing, so I can better steer myself towards the power that I wish to unlock. After making our choice, we're pointed in the direction of two nearby tribes, and told to pick which one we wish to work with, either the Myriad or the Jagni tribe. We're given a few lines of dialogue about each tribe and then told to go speak with the chief of whichever tribe we wish to join. And I do mean only a few lines. Here are the actual in-game lines of what we are told about these two tribes.
The Jagni tribe is likely to be your primary choice as they seek to become omnipresent and, most importantly, feared. Regardless of who you choose, it won't be easy, as the conflict between the tribes is worse than ever, teetering on the brink of war. The Jagni tribe only ever had one conviction: to bring balance to the world by wiping out the weak. They believe a cleansing is necessary to restore the world, and want to let the World Eaters bring down the Tree of Life. But siding with Jagni isn't necessarily a bad thing. Fate will find a way. The Myriad tribe is likely to be a good match as they act on the understanding of the greater good and have a code of honor. The Myriad's conviction to stop the World Eaters began when the Leviathans rose from the depths of the surf. Siding with the Myriad's movement for wholeness in a fragmented world might seem like the logical thing to do, But is it the right thing? One thing's certain, though. Destiny arrives all the same.
That's it. That's all we're given. We're given no chance to ask additional questions like how will the tribes treat the surviving refugees from conquered tribes? How will the tribes treat those who wish to be left alone or remain outside the tribal system? Why are the clan's beliefs what they are? What has the clan done in the past to gain their reputation? This decision is one of the first ones the game asks you to make, and it expects you to do so without being allowed to ask questions or find the answers for yourself. Now, yes, you can infer the answer to some of your questions, such as the Jagni tribe will probably treat refugees from conquered tribes very poorly, or that up until this point the Myriad tribe has probably led a mostly peaceful existence. But there are still no concrete answers to some very important questions that I personally want to know before I make an important decision such as this. Both camps are also functionally the same, which means there's no visual storytelling going on that could tell you anything useful. Both camps have wartime trenches that you have to pass through. Both tribes have the same merchants and treat the player the same when they approach each encampment. What's worse is that whatever tribe you choose to follow has long-lasting consequences by limiting what other tribes you can choose to join later on in the game. Not that any of this is communicated to you at the time. Instead, you're asked to make a reflexive decision based on a moral system that so far has had no impact. Myriad equals light, Jagni equals dark. Who do you want to work for? As I'm sure many of you can guess, I usually choose to work with the Myriad tribe, as I feel that cooperation and understanding are the best methods to ensure a happy society. So what does working with them entail? They want me to travel to the outpost of their rival tribe and raid, burn, and sabotage them, so the rival tribe's citizens have no choice but to submit to the tribe that I've chosen to work for. The first time I played this questline through, I didn't think anything of it. Typical RPG questing, I thought to myself as I burned down houses and triggered an infestation of moths. It's the cost of a war, I told myself as I freed political prisoners and challenged their leader to a duel. Each tribe is simple enough, requiring you to deal with 3 outpost camps before dealing with their central main camp, and defeating each camp and outpost unlocks vendors to trade with. Liberating them was a benefit, right? But then on my second playthrough, I thought about it. Wait. I chose the tribe that said they wanted to work together and treat everyone with understanding and compassion, right? So why am I being asked to burn down an outpost? Why am I being asked to fight their armies and kill their soldiers while Myriad tribe soldiers raid their outpost? Aren't these actions fundamentally opposed to the very values the tribe had said that they believed in? This issue is twofold for me, partially boiling down to Biomutant's lack of understanding of morality, but also I think due to a lack of imagination and also possible lack of time and design skill. If you want me to join a faction that I'm told is the light side faction, that faction's actions need to follow their belief system. Being good should cost me something, even if it's something as minute as in-game time. Imagine for a moment what that might look like in a quest. Perhaps one of the Jagni outposts is starving, so the Myriad tribe sends over a wagon of food, but needs me to protect that wagon because other Jagni outposts, or perhaps other raiders in general, want to steal the food for themselves. A starving Jagni coming to realize that the Myriad tribe aren't the monsters they've been told they are could be a very interesting story beat. Imagine wandering through the land and finding Jagni soldiers about to execute a dissenter for not following their belief system, and then being given the choice to save him so he can spread the word of the Myriad's kindness and compassion. In a society that only cares about strength and power, imagine if you could march into the capital, challenge their leader, and completely change the course of that culture if you won the duel. Instead, no matter what tribe you side with or what they claim their beliefs are, the Tribal War questline follows the same path. Attack and capture 3 outposts, then assault the capital city. At the end of which you are given the choice to kill or spare the leader. And even then, the provided options do not do a good job of explaining their outcomes. As a light-sided character, if I pick the spare option, I think that the tribal leader will be demoted in rank but be allowed to live and continue on. Just no longer in control. Nope. Instead, they are sent to the tribe dungeon for the rest of their lives, with no one to see them unless you, the character, choose to visit. Which kind of makes sense for an evil character, as I might go to gloat and mock them for their failure, but for a light-sided character, doesn't make a lot of sense for me to visit them. And yet again, the evil choice is more sadistic and cruel, involving you burying the enemy leader alive so they will die a slow and agonizing death over the course of an hour or so from carbon dioxide poisoning, while their newly liberated tribe can only listen and infer that if they step out of line, that will be their fate as well. Again, more sadistic and cruel than actually evil. Throughout the game, you'll repeat these actions a total of 2 times during the main questline, after which the third tribe will offer to surrender to you with no fuss and accept whatever fate you decide for their leader, which again makes me question Biomutant's understanding of morality, as this could be viewed as a light-coded act, since the leader is willingly submitting himself or herself to your judgment to avert a war where their people would be raided, captured, and killed, which would absolutely make no sense for an evil character to do. Each tribe also has their own idea of how to handle the World Eaters, with the light-coded tribes wanting to kill them and the dark-coded tribes wanting you to tame the beasts, but allow them to continue to keep killing the Tree of Life. And there's no way around that based off personal feeling. If the tribe you're aligned with wants you to do something, you have to do it, or the story ends right then and there in a stalemate. Lastly, while the user can change tribes, they can only do so once, and only to a tribe that is not a rival to your currently selected tribe. So no having a sudden change of heart halfway through the game. You're either good or bad for the whole game. In the end, the tribe war comes off as a confusing and unsatisfying narrative. From a gameplay perspective, raiding the outposts is boring and repetitive, with the user doing the same actions across all tribes. It is kind of neat to pass by a checkpoint in the world once in a while and get attacked by a rival tribe, only to return later and see that checkpoint be manned by friendly allies. And accessing the merchants with larger inventories and bankrolls is very nice, but overall, the experience is lackluster and half-hearted. So how would I improve it? Firstly, each tribe gets custom quests to reflect that tribe's belief. Secondly, I'd try to tell a story with each outpost, explain how the people live, what their day-to-day is like. Thirdly, I'd give the player the ability to ask questions about the different tribes and their beliefs. And finally, if you pick a tribe that does not follow your own personal beliefs, they should be given the option to attempt to betray you once you've completed their questline, since they would absolutely view you as a threat to their way of life. And while we're on the subject of tribes, let's talk about them. There's 6 of them, each with their own beliefs and ideas of how to handle the tribal war, the world, the Tree of Life, and the World Eaters. They are as follows. The Myriad tribe, who act on understanding of the greater good and a code of honor. They want to unite the tribes, defeat the World Eaters, and save the Tree of Life. The Ankati tribe believe that solidarity is what is needed to keep the world in balance. They want to unite the tribes, defeat the World Eaters, and save the Tree of Life. The Netra tribe values liberty and strives to protect freedoms. They want to separate the tribes, defeat the World Eaters, and save the Tree of Life. The Lotus tribe seeks to build a perfect order regardless how many are hurt in the process. They want to subdue the tribes and let the World Eaters destroy the Tree of Life. Jagni tribe want to become omnipresent and, most importantly, feared. They want to vanquish the tribes and let the World Eaters destroy the Tree of Life. The Pichu tribe supports natural evolution and the dogma that only the strong survive. They want to vanquish the tribes and let the World Eaters destroy the Tree of Life. Each tribe also has a tribal weapon and armor that you can earn from working with them. The weapon can be looted from defeated tribes, but not their armor, which I guess is used as some kind of a hook to try and get you to replay the game again, making different decisions. On a personal tangent, I can't help but feel that either the Myriad or the Ankati tribe was changed at some last-minute point in production. They both want the exact same outcomes despite having different views on the world, which seems a bit like an oversight to me. I also can't help but notice that there's no option to save the tree but wipe out the tribes, which would be my preference and might have made for a neat secret ending. Sadly, it's not meant to be. The tribe system is mostly redundant as they all have you completing the same quests and don't do enough to show you the outcomes of your decisions. And after you've turned over control to the tribe's Sifu, there's little reason to talk to them again, except to maybe visit the vendors that populate the outposts you've liberated. The tribal weapons are middling at best, but nowhere near as powerful as the weapons you can create on your own. The armors, while visually distinct, cannot be upgraded and therefore fall behind the gear you'll find out in the wild very quickly. Also, on another small tangent, how is it that the leader of my childhood bullies turned out to be a light-aligned clan leader? That doesn't make any sense to me. Improving the tribe system wouldn't be so much difficult as it would be resource-heavy. Perhaps adding in a cutscene or two to show you what life would be like for the refugees of the conquered tribes, random encounters of people from the old tribes who have tracked you down and want revenge, or else want to give you gifts for delivering them to a better way of life. I would also work more to make each tribe more distinct, perhaps giving their outposts or camps their own background song that only plays there. I also wouldn't throw the player into the tribal war right away, instead allowing them to wander the world for a bit first and encounter the various tribes randomly before being asked to make a decision of who to join. It might also help if we met the other tribal leaders when they were all kids as well, perhaps in a second flashback of some kind. In the end, the tribe system is another system that I can't help but feel would have benefited if they'd had just another year to examine and polish it. This game would have you think that the main quest is saving the Tree of Life, but ultimately I would argue that this is untrue. Instead, the main quest is how you handle the World Eaters, either by subduing or killing them. This quest will have you going to all corners of the map, reliving your own traumatic past and interacting with several NPCs. We're not really told how the World Eaters are killing the Tree of Life, only that their very existence is causing the tree harm, and that they're indiscriminately rampaging through the countryside and destroying anything and everything in their path. But we'll never actually be shown this part, other than the glimpse that we get at the very end of our tutorial. Each World Eater makes its home in a place with some kind of environmental hazard or gimmick that has to be contended with. The Jumbo Puff, for example, is battled in an area with no oxygen and must be fought using a large Mekton suit. The Porky Puff is found in an area of the Surf Archipelago and must be battled while riding atop the water on a jet ski. The Hoof Puff is found in the ruins of a power plant and must have its teeth pulled one by one before you can actually injure it. And finally, the Merc Puff is found in a unique underwater arena that the game just delivers you to and never allows you to actually explore. Overall, the battles with these monsters are adequate. From a mechanical perspective, they're fine. Each beast is best fought using your guns, as getting in close to melee range opens you up for some massively damaging attacks. Also, each boss has a trick that you can use to distract them and either break an attack chain or else stun them temporarily. Oddly enough, always involving a small creature of some kind, now that I think about it. My favorite battle is probably the Porky Puff, the battle that you're currently seeing on screen, as I liked the mental image of my character riding around on a jet ski while fighting this giant kaiju-looking monster, though I wish it hadn't taken place in such a narrow arena. That being said, only two of the monsters really felt all that special or unique. When fighting the Jumbo Puff, he would throw bolts of lightning at me, which is a nice departure from the usual swipe, slam, and grab attacks. And during the battle with the Merc Puff, he would spew these kind of toxic, or maybe acidic, mines that I could run into and would cause a lot of damage to my craft. But the Hoof Puff and Porky Puff feel pretty analogous to mini-boss monsters I'd already encountered in the world previously, albeit with some additional mechanics to them. Overall, the World Eaters are an interesting, albeit commonly used style of boss in a video game, the kind of boss who by their mere presence throws off the balance of nature, but is never really explained how or why they're able to do so. So how would I make this better? Well, for one, I'd give them more screen time. Perhaps your character has a chance to see them in the faraway distance along the edges of the map. That way the player can see them but not actually interact with them prematurely. I'd also have it be that the player can ask locals in the area about them and be given information about the damage they've caused. I also like the idea of making each of the World Eaters cause some unusual calamity within the game, and then make the player have to deal with that, such as perhaps the Jumbo Puff being able to generate abnormally destructive electrical storms that the player could get caught in and have to dodge lightning strikes, or maybe the Porky Puff causing rogue waves and tsunamis in the Surf Archipelago that the player has to avoid or get thrown from their goo glider. The Hoof Puff could trigger devastating earthquakes with its trampling hooves that could cause the player to have to stop moving until the earthquake stops. And finally, the Merc Puff's poison could be spreading throughout the underground aquifers, which could cause water in that region to start dealing damage the longer the player is in it. Also, on a slight tangent, the Hoof Puff sounds like it should look like some kind of horse, yet on the screen you can see that it clearly does not have any kind of hooves at all, but instead clawed feet. To me, this monster needs a complete redesign to better line up with the in-game description. Overall, while I like the inclusion of the World Eaters, more should have been done to flesh them out. Just how are they damaging the world? Because as it is, they stay in their little corners and do absolutely nothing until your character comes to fight them. Doesn't seem like much of a threat, really. Pretty much immediately after choosing to join either the Jagni or Myriad tribe, you're directed to visit the ruins of an old burnt-down village that used to be your home when you were a child. Once you arrive, you experience a flashback to the last day of your childhood. You'll meet 2 NPCs who teach you how to swim and how to craft, your father who teaches you how to enhance your clothing with baubles and trinkets that you'll find, and then be introduced to your Muma who teaches you Wung Fu. During this time, you'll also encounter a trio of bullies, 2 of which you'll recognize as the leader of the Myriad and Jagni tribes. You'll also be shown the moment your character is given your automaton companion, which was built for you by some kind of hookah-smoking panda bear-esque creature whose name we never actually really learn, but who apparently has a questline called the Mirage, which upon completion allows you to actually upgrade the automaton to perform different functions. During this entire flashback sequence through dialogue, you're allowed to slightly shape your relationship with your Muma, as well as your attitude towards the bullies, the NPCs you encounter, and the world in general. Overall, I think this part of the flashback is decent. I like the backstory, and it's nice to be able to see your character's past a little bit. If I had to change anything, I might actually make it a little bit longer so your character can explore the world more as a child. One complaint I do have, though, is about the size difference between you and your Muma. It's almost comically absurd, and the houses that the villagers live in are clearly to the scale for humans, but not these characters. Let's talk about Wung Fu for a few minutes. It's supposedly some special ability or some unique power that your character and your Muma's disciples have learned, but takes the form of some kind of martial arts. Overall, I really don't like it. It's accessed by completing a series of combos using your normal combat abilities, and then once activated, gives you access to 5 additional combos that just deal greater amounts of damage. I'm honestly scratching my head with this one, as I don't really understand what the big deal is about this Wung Fu. There's nothing particularly mystical about it, and there's nothing that would lead me to believe that anyone couldn't learn these moves given enough time. It's not as if they're secret ability. The system feels rather half-baked, and I can't help but wonder if more Wung Fu abilities had been planned but never implemented into the game. Perhaps the player was supposed to be able to learn them as the game progressed, or perhaps the existing combos that the character knew was supposed to change depending on their light or dark side rankings. When it comes to improving this system, again, I might seriously consider dropping it. I can't figure out what it adds to the story, and it doesn't really make my character feel all that special or anything. If I had to keep the system, I would tone down the amount of reverence that different NPCs have for you and your ability to use Wung Fu, and instead I would simply introduce it as a higher form of combat that only a few people have because they've studied and practiced for so long. The next part of the flashback has your village being attacked by the same mutant bear monster that you fought off at the start of the game. You learn his name is Lupa Lupin, and that he has been following you for a very long time. You get a brief moment to fight alongside your mother to try and save the village, but ultimately it's no use. In a sequence that probably should have been all cutscenes, Lupin throws you into the nearby lake, after which your mother dives in to save you and begins swimming to shore, only to be killed by Lupin when he pursues you into the water. I don't know why they chose to make some parts of this sequence interactable and why some parts are all cutscenes. And if I'm completely honest, the scene where the mother dies seems painfully stiff and almost comical in a way. There's no blood, no wound, no seeming reason that she should have died, other than because the plot demanded it. Also, this little animation of him grabbing his throat to indicate that he's out of oxygen is hilarious to me. I don't actually know anyone who's ever done this in real life when they're struggling to breathe, which makes me wonder how it found its way into cartoons and gaming in general. After the death of our mother, we finish swimming to shore and are greeted by our father, who hurries us along in an attempt to flee our still pursuing attacker. In a valiant effort to save our life, our father pushes us to safety before being caught and dragged away by Lupin. It's here that the flashback ends and we find ourselves standing on the other side of the lake and ready to continue on our main quest, but with newfound knowledge. 1. Lupin has been following us and trying to kill us ever since that day. 2. Lupin killed our mother and father, meaning we are the last of our bloodline. And 3. At some point, we're going to have to decide how we want to handle him. Interestingly enough, you can actually encounter Lupin in the world randomly, with him attacking various wild animals for food and sustenance. And it'll be up to you to decide if you want to stop him from killing the wildlife, or if you want to turn a blind eye and allow him to hunt. Additionally, you can actually also find his camp, which is at the base of the world tree, which oddly enough is only a couple, maybe 100 or so feet from the home base of one of your allies, which just seems kind of strange to me. I actually stumbled across this location by accident while playing on my own, and I couldn't help but notice how primitive and lonely this camp looks. A single rickety tent, a single campfire, nothing to suggest any kind of happiness can be found here. It's a place he returns to because it's perhaps safe for him to do so, not because he wants to. And it was around that time that I began to wonder if what we knew of him was not the entire truth. In the original flashback, it seemed as if he attacked us for seemingly no reason, but I couldn't help but wonder, could there be more to this story too? Later on in the game, after having dealt with 2 of the World Eaters, I was directed by Out of Date to go see Lupin and see if I could put an end to the hostilities between us. Up until this point, several or more notable NPCs I had encountered had asked me if I was capable of forgiving Lupin for what he had done. Was I able to let go of all that he had done and taken from me and forgive him? So I thought, hey, this might be a chance for me to really test that. Perhaps I might even be able to have a conversation with him about our history and what went down. Sadly, this is not meant to be. I arrive at the camp where he's butchering an animal he's recently killed, and the moment he sees me, he attacks. The battle isn't too difficult. I do have to rely on my guns a lot since my melee weapons are pretty slow, and his attacks are oddly fast for such a large animal, but I do prevail in the end and defeat him, only for these odd roots to suddenly erupt from the ground and immobilize him. Again, I thought, here's a chance to talk with him, to explain myself and to demand an explanation of him. Why did he attack us? Why did he kill my parents? Why has he been following me all this time? Something. Anything. But no. I'm told that for now I have won, and that for the time being, Lupin won't be a problem, so I should go and speak to Out of Date again. And that's when the ball drops. That's when we learn the truth behind this monster that's been pursuing us for almost no reason for so long. In a flashback, we learn that our Muma, possibly prior to even our birth, had gone out with her disciples and attacked the small camp that Lupin's mother had made for herself and her then child. In that cutscene, we watch as our mother kills Lupin's mother and leaves the orphan Lupa alone, presumably to die. Why did she do this? What crime did the mother and child commit that warranted the death of the mother and the orphaning of a child? The crime for following their nature, of being predators and consuming meat in a world predominantly occupied by what I can assume are only herbivores? I won't lie, this really infuriated me and almost made me not want to continue playing the game. First off, while we're given no concrete evidence of this, we can assume from the way she's written and the tonal beats that the game hits with her that our Muma is probably a light-coded character. That is to say, someone who willingly made sacrifices for the betterment of others. In D&D, there is a concept of something called an alignment shift. It occurs when a player's actions have gone against their character's established alignment, so many times so that the DM can no longer justify continuing to allow them to claim to be said alignment. Usually such shifts happen gradually over time, a little good here, a little bad there, and over time the needle of their alignment moves around until it reaches a point where it needs to be changed to more accurately reflect the player's displayed moral alignment. Occasionally, though, a major event can happen that will shift a person's alignment dramatically. Maybe the party paladin disregards his oath. Perhaps the rogue kills an innocent in cold blood. Perhaps the evil sorcerer does a truly selfless act. Regardless of the reason, these singular events are strong enough to shift a character's alignment. This, to me, Muma killing the mother of Lupa Lupin and leaving the child Lupin to die, is one of those acts, and not for the better. To me, this completely recontextualizes our mother and paints her not as a malevolent and guardian force, but as a warlord and a radicalist who destroyed a family simply because they were different, and that difference made them a danger. Not only that, but it instigated a cycle of violence that is still playing out in-game to this modern day, since Lupa Lupin is still pursuing us in his hunt for revenge. In a way, her actions completely undermine the message of the game that we, as conscious, thinking, reasonable creatures, should strive to live in balance with the world. In fact, the entire game seems to have its idea of balance skewed to be light-coded, when in reality, on a light, gray, and dark scale, balance would, by definition, be morally gray. Balance in the natural world does not mean that there is no death. In fact, quite the opposite. In a balanced world, there would be just as much death as there is life, the two sides of the scale always maintaining their balance. Predator and prey serve an equal purpose, both needing the other to maintain the balance in nature. In the natural world, there is no concept of right and wrong. There is only survival of the fittest. You're either strong enough to survive, or you're not. And all that is strong will eventually weaken until it is no longer fit for survival. And when that time comes, a predator, such as Lupa Lupin, comes along and clears away that which is no longer fit. Is it violent? Sometimes yes, but it's what's needed to maintain the balance. There will never be a disproportionate number of predators because they can only support a population that aligns with the number of unfit animals they can consume. And the prey population will never grow out of control because they are routinely culled and kept in check by the predators that will actively hunt them. This, at its core, is the theory of natural selection, first proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859. But Biomutant doesn't seem to understand this, and instead preaches that a balanced world is a world without predators, a world where the prey species live without competition and instead work together. And while I'll admit that does have a bit of a utopian vibe to it, it's fundamentally at odds with the idea of living in balance with nature. It's a modern utopianist idea they're pitching, not a natural utopia that could actually happen. And so comes the final showdown. Once the World Eaters are dead or subjugated, and the tribe war has been handled, it's time to wrap up the final threat of the game, Lupa Lupin. How will we handle him knowing what we know now? Will we forgive him and put an end to the cycle of violence once and for all? Will we kill him, completing the sin of our mother and putting an end to the natural order of things in the name of good? Will we perhaps allow ourselves to be killed and in so doing atone for what our parents took from our rival? Nope. Forget all of that. It's boss battle time. To say that I was disappointed in this final confrontation is a major understatement. No dialogue, no chance to talk, no chance to forgive. All game long, people have been asking me, do I want revenge? Do I want to forgive him? Am I capable of forgiving him? But always, what do I want? And the game, for all its hours of gameplay and build-up, can't even be bothered to let me follow through with that choice. It's boss battle time, no matter what. Even if all game long I have been talking about forgiving him, I still have to battle Lupa Lupin to the death here and now in the caverns under the Tree of Life. What a letdown. To be fair, the battle itself is pretty good. Lupa-Lupin stops holding back and pulls out all the stops to try and kill us, finally. He's faster than he's ever been, hits hard, and has several different attacks, from grabs and ground pounds to large area sweeping attacks, and these kind of psychic waves that he can throw out across the battlefield. It's just disappointing that in the final moments of battle, there's still no choice. No option to spare the creature whose only sin was being born a predator. No choice to stop and apologize for the pain that my family has caused him. In the end, you kill Lupa-Lupin in that cavern, ending the cycle of violence for yourself and putting an end to any hope the world has of achieving a true natural balance. The ending of the game itself is brief and, if I'm honest, not overly satisfying. All game long, Out of Date has been working on an old human Ark, a spaceship built by the Human Toxinol Corporation, which they used to flee Earth when it had finally become so polluted that humans could no longer survive there. That was hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and yet somehow this old codger who's confined to a wheelchair has managed to not only get it working again, but made sure that it's space-worthy, and has given us the task of filling the 6 seats on it. Naturally, he'll be taking one of the seats, and us taking another, meaning that after all the work we've done, we don't even get to stay and live in the world to see the choices that we've created come to fruition. I'll talk a bit about the NPCs in this game in a minute, but for me, I tried to pick characters that were excited to see other places. And so at the end of the game, we all pile in, each of us no doubt wondering what is in store for us as the old ship rattles to life and first takes to the skies and then the stars, bound for who knows where and who knows what. Biomutant is a game whose story is confusing at best and outright deceptive at worst. Luckily, my feelings for the story do not stop me from enjoying the absolutely gorgeous game world that the developers have worked to create. From the wide-open hills of the valley to the surf archipelago and its many small islands and beaches, the swamp and bogs in the northeast, and the forested woodlands in the northwest, Biomutant is a game that absolutely wants you to get lost and wander around in its world. A day and night cycle give the player a good feeling of the passage of time. More than once I came out of a structure or popped out of a sewer grate I had been exploring to discover that day had become night or night had become day. The environments are all excellently designed and have their own distinct feels to them, making wandering around the world a treat. More times than I can count, I'd be running along a path on my way to finish a quest, only to be enticed off my path by an in-the-distant ruin or an open sewer cover or some derelict car on the side of the road, tempting me with the possibility of loot. The leftover human ruins that dot the landscape each have their own little purposes, sometimes holding just simple loot or else item puzzles, and sometimes even NPCs to converse with. The most impressive ruins I found were the remains of nuclear power plants, each with multiple explorable buildings, several enemies, and environmental hazards of radioactivity, as well as boss battles to fight down in the bowels of the giant ancient structures. Upon defeating these bosses, it allows me then to use a radioactive pool to change my appearance independent of my stats. Biomutant's world has a variety of biomes to wander around and explore, each with their own palette of color and textures to choose from. For the majority of my playthrough, I found myself in the grasslands, so anytime I got to detour into a new biome, I made sure to enjoy it for as long as I could. The heat-scorched dunes and dirt lands are a wonderful array of reds, blacks, and browns, their colors waving in the heat as you wander through them. The snow-capped areas to the north are a wonderful departure from the usual greens and browns, all covered under a blanket of soft white snow. The red rock lands towards the middle of the map have a distinctively Arizona vibe to them, and do a nice job of breaking up the surrounding area's assault of green. The forested hills in the northeast give me a kind of frontier optimism that this world is starting to recover and come back from the apocalypse. Even areas of the world that are not as lush still retain tremendous visual detail and beauty about them. The airless wastes to the east are fun to explore, a washed-out stretch of land covered in oily black tar that smothers plant life and makes it impossible to breathe on your own. It's truly the most apocalyptic area in the game, and does a great job of making the far-gone apocalypse still feel very fresh. Even the underground areas are wonderfully rendered, giving them a particularly dark and confined feel to them, many of them containing open area arenas for the animals nesting in there to attack you as you wander through them. Dotted here and there through the land are various villages that are not directly affiliated with the various tribes, but who are under the various tribes' protections as seen by the guards wandering around. On several occasions, as I happened to be wandering by, these villages were in the middle of being attacked by rival tribes. Driving off the attackers and later helping to rebuild these villages by donating resources, spending time cutting wood, defeating troubling local monsters, or solving a local concern lends a powerful connection to the world. As you wander, you come to know the land and its people, at least on a surface level. You find a certain part of the world that you gravitate towards. Me, for example, I found myself drawn to the surf archipelago. I spent many hours riding the goo glider through the water, exploring the small islands and battling the small pirating vessels that roam the waters with me. Much later in the game, I even spent some time in the surf wandering around on the back of a giant fluffy shark. Overall, the world of Biomutant is beautiful, with newer structures marked with a kind of vaguely Asian aesthetic in contrast with familiar sights of dilapidated human homes, buildings, and even entire small company towns that have been abandoned. It's a treat to wander these areas and try to figure out the story. The story might not be very deep on account of how shallow the world and its writing is, but it's still fun to explore and imagine. You'll be following a trail, come over a hill, and for a moment be absolutely blinded by the vista in front of you. The hills dropping away to reveal the whole of the valley, the tree of life off in the distance, the faint glow of a nearby village as they start to light their fires for the night, the sun setting slowly behind the mountains. In most games, I find the inclusion of a photo mode to be unnecessary, but in this case, I'm glad it was included, as this game has given me some truly amazing pictures over my time with it. Of course, what world is complete without people to fill it? Biomutant has a large collection of nameless characters, some of whom only have mildly interesting things to say, such as pointing you towards a location that you haven't found yet, or else asking you to go on some quest to find something or do something for them. Most of these are little more than filler quests, just meant to pad a player's time with the game, but a few of these NPCs are actually pretty interesting and enjoyable. Some of my favorites are Nova. Nova's dream is in the stars, but now her head's stuck in the clouds. In some places, the pollution's so thick that nothing can break through, not even her long eye. She's convinced a twinkle shard would boost her long eye so she'd be able to see the stars, and needs help getting a shard from a twinkle that's about to break through the atmosphere when it hits the ground. Nova is a fun character, possibly one of the only characters in-game that doesn't seem overly concerned with anything that's happening to this world, so far in that it affects her ability to stargaze and observe space. Overall, her quests are pretty short and pretty compact, and mostly comprise just gathering parts for her telescope to help her stargaze better. She doesn't really add anything to the world, but I like her character nonetheless, and her character design is kinda interesting to me. She's also one of the few characters that I think has a definitive female gender, which is odd because during character creation, that was never an option that we were provided. Mito claims to be a simple lamp maker, bringing light to the world as best he can. I'm not entirely sure what to make of Mito, if I'm honest. In playing the game for over 20 hours and multiple playthroughs, I've never yet encountered a creature who looks exactly like him, meaning his appearance could be the result of a unique mutation, or possibly that he is the only one or last of his kind, a lone survivor of a species we just missed. Or it could be as simple as him being an outsider to these lands like us who's wandered in. Whatever the case, his design is not the only striking thing about him. As his bio suggests, he's a traveling lantern maker who is apparently very good at his craft. His quest involves going to 3 different locations, first to find a glowing ember to ignite the lantern with, then to find some kind of smoke puff, perhaps to fuel the flame, and lastly to find a suitable housing for the lantern itself in the form of an old firework body. When I did this quest, I was excited thinking I would actually get a lantern that I could attach maybe to my back and have it illuminate the darkness of nighttime or whenever I was in a cave. Sadly, instead, the lantern provided is just another scope for a gun. Definitely a missed opportunity. Moog. Moog is assembling a record of the monsters roaming the world so he can let everyone know what places to avoid. He's tracking small and big and appreciates all the help he can get mapping out the whereabouts of the smallest squib all the way up to the monolithic monsters. Simply put, Moog is a hunter who sees the world in terms of predator and prey, with he himself occupying the place as the biggest predator of them all. In conversation, Moog will talk about the importance of deciding who lives and who dies every time he draws his weapon, and laments that few truly understand what it means. Moog's quests send you all over the map to hunt down large predators that have been troubling the lands, and in return, rewards keys that unlock long, sealed-up military shelters that usually contain a signature weapon and several containers of high-level loot. At the end of his questline, he gifts the player with a pair of robotic arms and legs, which can be equipped like clothing and provide no kind of stat benefit, but do look rather stylish. I myself took to wearing the legs as I liked the idea of my character seeing the value in a pair of robotic legs that would never grow tired, unlike his fleshy ones. Maya Doom. There's a poppet for everything, or so Maya believes. There's one for you too, but you've yet to come across it. Right now, Maya needs your help to find a pin pricker to use on the poppet she's made to weaken the Northeastern World Eater. Maya seems to be a character that borrows heavily from the concept of a shaman or medicine woman. Her use of poppets, although highly reminiscent of voodoo dolls, is actually a real-world form of magical charm or fetish, and is defined as a doll made to represent a person for casting spells on that person, or to aid the person through magic. They are often used by shamans and witches as a kind of spiritual bridge between themselves and their desired targets. In this case, Maya is on our side and sends us on a quest to find a special nail located in a pre-human barn so she can use its power to weaken the hoof puff. Overall, I like Maya. She's one of the only characters in the game who seems to be taking an active role in dealing with the World Eaters, even if her method is a bit passive. Personally, I'd have liked more quests from her, and I'd have enjoyed it if, as a reward, she made a poppet to represent you, since she says there is one of you somewhere in the world, and perhaps be able to use that to gain a larger-than-normal stat boost or some kind of unique level up. The last NPC I feel worth mentioning is Trim, who, as his name suggests, sells the player the ability to change their fur pattern and colors after completing a few quests. Nothing noteworthy really to say here, but I find his styling and slightly hipster appearance a bit amusing, and I like the idea that in a world of anthropomorphic characters, someone would take an interest in fur cutting and styling. Possibly one of the game's most divisive inclusions is the concept that none of the characters in the game world speak a recognizable real-world language, and instead have to be translated by an omnipresent narrator, voiced by voice actor David Shaw Parker, who conveys the spirit of what each character is saying to the player. During gameplay, the narrator will also occasionally pipe up and say some kind of inspirational quote or affirmation that you are on the right path in-game. Some players found the narrator to be extremely annoying, as well as the seeming gibberish the NPC characters speak to the player, so much so that a patch was eventually included in the game that allowed the user to adjust how often the player would hear the NPC gibberish and how often the narrator would interject during gameplay. On a slight tangent, at the end of the game it's revealed that the narrator is actually the hookah-smoking panda bear who built your automaton, which to me raises some slightly creepy questions. Has he been watching us through the automaton this whole time? Was the automaton translating what the NPC characters were saying to us, the character? Were all his worldly interjections actually relayed through the automaton directly to us? And several times in-game, we see the narrator character off in the distance, and if approached, he allows us to complete a series of combat flashbacks that unlock additional functionality in the automaton. Does this mean that this character has been stalking us for the entire game? Honestly, I never found the narrator to be that annoying. His worldly interjections were kind of nice as a way to break up the silence that can fill the game when the character is just wandering around for long periods of time, but I can see how he would get annoying to players, so I think it's good that a way was added to decrease his interjections. Leveling up in Biomutant is your normal RPG system. That is to say, you get a tiny bit of experience for solving puzzles and finding new locations, but the bulk of your experience will come from completing quests and defeating enemies that you'll encounter out in the world. According to sources online, Level 50 is the max level a player can reach, and I have no doubt that that is possible, as wild enemies seem to respawn every few in-game days or so. As one would expect, leveling up earns the player a stat point to invest into one of their stats, though sadly, this investment does not affect the character's appearance as it did in the beginning of the game, further diminishing the game's promise of a character that would mutate and evolve as you play. And while a player can choose to specialize in a particular stat, as I had originally planned to do with my intelligence, there isn't really any benefit to doing so unless the player is attempting to impose additional constraints on how they wish to play. In addition, the player is given a perk point in which they can buy a perk from a small list that mostly just apply additional bonuses, like an additional 10% to range damage, or a 33% increase to their reload speed. In fact, bonuses seem to be the only method I could find to increase the stat of my guns outside of finding better and better parts for them. Another slight tangent here, can we talk about the menu in this game? It's bad. Really bad. You have one screen for crafting, one screen for your existing gear and resistances, a screen to show your light and dark side ratings, a screen to select your mutations and psi abilities from, and a screen for you to quick save outfits that you may wish to change into later. All of the screens look similar and are all navigated by holding down the controller trigger buttons. The whole thing can be confusing and frustrating. On more than one occasion, I would find myself trying to equip something I just looted, only to realize I'm on the crafting screen. I can't help but feel that if the developers had had a little more time, they might have been able to smooth this issue out, perhaps by compressing and/or combining some of these screens together to improve the user's experience. In the 1950s, psionics were a proposed discipline that applied the principles of engineering to the study and employment of paranormal or psychic energies. That is to say, the idea of taking paranormal phenomenon and applying them in useful ways. In Biomutant, psi points are another area in which your character can change over the course of gameplay, granting powers based around your light or dark side rankings. Or, if you chose the Psi Freak class, you get your first psi power for free, and are able to generate orbs of electrical energy to throw at your enemies. Other powers the character can unlock are Blink, the ability to rapidly close the distance between themselves and a target, or else cover large stretches of empty ground very quickly. Levitate, a self-explanatory power that allows the user to hover several feet off the ground to avoid enemies, or to make traversing the environment easier. Telekinesis, probably my favorite power, which allows the user to pick up small enemies and hurl them at their allies, or else rip up chunks of dirt and rock and throw them at your enemies. And the most powerfully damaging ability, Sky Spark, which allows the user to call down a heavy strike of negative energy that causes an area of effect damage to all those caught in it. While I like the idea of including psionic powers in a game, their designation of light and dark feels oddly arbitrary. For example, both Levitate and Telekinesis require 20 ranks in light or dark to unlock their respective skills. Yet Levitation is considered a light-coded power, while Telekinesis is considered dark. Yes, arguments could be made, but at their core, the alignment of the powers should be up to the user. Perhaps the player's alignment should instead affect the manner in which that power is used. A light-coded Telekinesis user might only use rocks or discarded debris as a projectile weapon, whereas a dark-coded user would certainly enjoy picking up smaller enemies and hurling them helplessly at their allies. Functionally, the power is the same, but presentationally they differ depending on the user's light or dark ranking. It's a shame too, because this split between light and dark caused my character to have to pursue a path that felt very artificial and confusing, resulting in my character capturing numerous small creatures with a butterfly net, and then deciding their fate of life or death depending on whatever power I was currently in the pursuit of. At least gaining psi points is almost painfully easy, requiring the player to locate shrines set up all over the game world and to then pray at them. The idea of psionic powers is a good idea for Biomutant, but its implementation is frustrating and can put the player at odds with their intended playstyle. As someone who enjoys spamming powers and abilities in RPGs, the only way I can think of to improve these abilities is to remove their light and dark side coding, and instead change their presentation as mentioned before. Perhaps I would also include that for the top tier powers, some kind of quest must be undergone to learn them from someone else who's already learned and mastered those abilities. Mutations are an area of particular fascination for me. As a 90s kid, my first introduction to the idea of mutants and their mutations was of course the early 90s Marvel cartoon X-Men. For many, mutations and the concept of evolution can be confusing and at times are used somewhat interchangeably, even though the two processes are different and yet linked with each other at the same time. For the record, a mutation is defined as the changing of the structure of a gene resulting in a variant form that may be transmitted to subsequent generations, caused by the alteration of a single base unit in DNA, or the deletion, insertion, or rearrangement of a larger section of genes or chromosomes. That is to say, a random occurrence that has the potential to be passed down to a future generation. Whereas evolution is defined as the change in the inheritable characteristics of a biological population over successive generations, or the overall shift an entire population will experience over time. And while the two are linked with evolution needing mutations to continue, mutations are not dependent on evolution, and is instead driven by factors such as environments, scarcity of resources, and the availability of potential mates. The most famous example of these two concepts is, in my opinion, Darwin's finches in the Galapagos, where each species of finch mutated and evolved over thousands of years to each fill a separate niche within the local ecosystem, with some having larger and stronger beaks to crack the harder shells of nuts found on the island, while others developed smaller and more narrow beaks to peck and feed on insects. In science fiction, an additional concept of evolution has been introduced, the idea of a forced evolutionary response, usually induced by exposure to an incalculable amount of radiation or some other stimulus that triggers the body to undergo rapid and rampant mutation in the attempt to survive the exposure, oftentimes resulting in the individual gaining some kind of unique power or ability in the process. Biomutant seems to subscribe to this area of thinking when it comes to mutation abilities, since in order to mutate your character, you must interact with biocontamination pods and pools, or else defeat certain enemies. Upon collecting the required number of bio points, the user will be able to spend those points to buy an array of abilities, including the ability to regurgitate caustic bile onto their enemies, the ability to generate and emit rad wisps to swarm and damage their enemies, the ability to generate a large bubble of mucus to cushion falls as well as to stick enemies to, or else reach out of reach areas, and the ability to armor your character's back so as to use it as a makeshift sled on hills and downward inclines. Of all these abilities, rad wisps and the aforementioned mucus bubble were my most used, with rad wisps being a nice power for the early game, and the mucus bubble making an excellent traversal power to help get around the world. However, two powers don't really seem to fit in with the others. The fungi power allows the user to generate a mushroom in front of their character to either launch an enemy up into the air, or else hop on to gain an extra high jump. And mud punch, which seemingly allows the user to deliver a punch through the ground at a target. These powers feel more psionic in nature to me and don't really fit the vibe of mutation. Additionally, I can't help but be disappointed that mutating your character does not result in a permanent change to how they appear. Imagine if taking rad wisps caused your character to start storing massive amounts of radiation for its eventual release, thus causing the veins in your body to glow with the radioactive buildup. For now, we'll just hand-wave away the fact that you'd be a walking Chernobyl to all those around you. Or if, when you took the turtle shell ability, back becoming hard and scaly with armor plates growing up through the fur that covers your body. Or if purchasing the mucus bubble gave the character a more damp and amphibious look to them. When I first heard about Biomutant and its emphasis on mutation and evolution of your character, it was something like the above that I pictured, with each power I took changing and altering the appearance of my character, so that no two players would look exactly the same. Again, I can't help but feel that if the game had had another year, it might have been able to implement something like this, or at the very least come up with a few more abilities, as by the time I had beaten the game on even a casual playthrough, I'd unlocked all but 2 of the powers. I think the way in which I would improve this system are, as previously mentioned, nix the fungus and mud punch abilities, make each power change the appearance of the player character in some way, and add additional powers to choose from. It might also be nice if there was some high-level power that allowed me to swim better, or perhaps stick to walls and other surfaces. In my opinion, the crafting system of Biomutant is probably the system that received the most attention from developers, as it is completely fleshed out, and honestly, I can't think of any way to actually improve it. The sheer number of options that you have to create weapons is mind-boggling, and honestly, I could spend over an hour just going through the different menus to create my perfect custom weapon or firearm. The system is actually so well done that honestly, I don't have a lot to say about it. There's nothing really to fix and nothing really to tweak. One final thing I want to talk about before ending the video is the enemy variety in this game. Throughout gameplay, you've seen me fight numerous monsters and different types of enemies, and I really appreciate the sheer variety of them. There's naturally occurring wild creatures, bandits, pre-human robots, mutated abominations, radioactive abominations, and even these strange yokai-looking creatures that honestly give me vibes of like Japanese mythology, which I kind of dig because the idea of the specters and ghosts of the old world haunting the new developing world is kind of a neat idea. I really appreciate the variety of monsters and enemies in this game. I just wish combat was maybe a little better for them. Overall, Biomutant is a game that feels like it's lacking in direction in almost every plot it tries to show the player. The tribal war makes little tonal sense and doesn't accommodate how all players will feel about the situation. The questline with Lupa Lupin is railroaded to hell and back, and the World Eaters, while a neat concept, never really feel like much of an actual threat, let alone a persistent one. At its core, the game, which claims to be about living in balance with the natural world, instead skews its view to fit a more utopian view of balance, instead of what it actually means to live in balance with the natural world. And as of right now, none of this is likely to be fixed or change, as the game has received little after-launch support beyond a few initial patches to fix some bugs, and a more recent patch to bring the game's graphics up to 4K and make the game compatible with next-gen consoles. Beyond that, and a small patch to bring the game over to the Nintendo Switch, the game has been seemingly abandoned by its developers, Experiment 101. Even their Twitter is nearly inactive, with the most recent tweet being from May of 2023 and consisting of a sales pitch for the Switch version of the game. There's been no word of DLC or future updates, and after so many years of silence, the likelihood of that happening is basically null and void. Despite this, despite every negative thing I have said about this game, I enjoyed my time with it. In the moment, the gameplay is fun, and the world is fun to explore. Just maybe take it at face value and don't go looking for a deeper meaning in it. Just enjoy wandering the grasslands, riding on the back of a fuzzy shark, or battling a pre-world robot guarding a hoard of loot. I would definitely recommend picking it up if you see it on sale for under $20, as there is a surprising amount of game to be had here. And with respawning enemies, you can essentially wander and live in this world indefinitely if you so choose. I want to thank everyone who clicked on this video, and especially thank those who stuck with me through the entire thing. This was my first attempt at making something like this, and I hope you found it enjoyable. I'm not sure if I'll do more video essays in the future, but if you wish to stick around on the off chance that I do, you can subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.